Welcome to the Blue Economy Primer, a New Orleans-based podcast where you learn from the experts the practical tools and solution sets that will empower your community to adapt and thrive in an age of climate and economic discontinuity. The following special edition of the Blue Economy Primer, available as a YouTube video with graphics or in audio-only format, is based on the multi-sector Blue Economy panel discussion titled Building Resilient Communities and a Regenerative Blue Economy for Our Gulf Coast, which took place on May 31st, 2023 at the State of the Coast Conference in New Orleans, Louisiana. The panel, moderated by Deep Blue Academy, was part of the conference topic track, Preparing for Climate Change, Mitigation and Adaptation. For additional background information and support materials about the panel participants and links to the YouTube version that includes all of the graphics, please visit the Blue Economy Primer website at deepblue.institute/podcast. Thank you for your interest in the work of Deep Blue and our community resilience partners. My name is Greg Delaune. I am the founder and CEO of Deep Blue Institute and the managing director, executive director of Deep Blue Academy, which is a nonprofit focused on blue economy and blue technology development for the coast. So thinking about a resilient Louisiana coast, a resilient Gulf Coast, how do we develop the technologies and the solution sets that we need to save our own communities, creating jobs, creating solution sets, engineering solutions, et cetera, for our communities moving forward, looking at the next 50 to 100 years. But then also, how do we turn that into economic activity that can be exported? So a little bit to what the governor mentioned, these high demand solution sets that are going to be necessary around the world. So I am extremely pleased and proud and honored to have with us today a highly qualified panel with some deep expertise in all of the different sectors that are part of this discussion. So we're going to be talking about building resilient communities and a regenerative blue economy for our Gulf Coast and all of the different sector components that go into that. So to start out with, I'm going to ask each of our panel members to give a brief introduction, a little bit about their background, 1 to 2 minutes, so that the audience knows who you are. And again, you can start to think about what are you interested in hearing about from this panel about what the future looks like. John, you want to start out?
I'm John Day. I've been professor emeritus at Louisiana State University in the Oceanography department, and I've been conducting research on the Mississippi Delta for over half a century.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Conwell. I'm president and CEO of the UNO Research and Technology Foundation and the Beach, recently renamed Research Park at the University of New Orleans. As a background, I have a pretty eclectic one, which I think has done me well for this job. It goes back from, if I just stick to New Orleans, I would say that I spent 15 years doing government affairs at Tulane University, chief of staff for the President Cowan, ran his think tank. I spent a couple of years as a consultant that included the early construction of a grand prize type water challenge to develop sensors, and then spent 3 years working for Mayor Landrieu as his senior advisor for economic development. Spent a little bit of time as well running a foundation that supports the city's recreation departments.
Awesome. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jon Atkinson. I'm the president and CEO of the Idea Village. We're a nonprofit organization that supports startups in New Orleans and across the Gulf Coast. I also have the distinction of being a founder and fund administrator for an early stage equity fund called Lagniappe Angels, where we invest in early stage startups. Prior to that, I was the founding director of the Center for Entrepreneurship and Community Development at Loyola University in New Orleans. And so probably the least qualified person on this panel, but I'm bringing the startup innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem perspective for how you build this into the future.
Well, I think you're kind of perfect for this panel, actually. Harry Vorhoff, Deputy Director of Coastal Activities in the Governor's Office. we, in the Governor's Office of Coastal Activities, focus on supporting the chair of the CPRA board and really kind of help provide support on the policy front and the legal front to support and kind of expand upon the state's coastal program and coastal master plan. And so additional kind of policy efforts include the governor's climate initiative to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which I'll touch on in a few moments, adaptive governance, and other policy reforms that we're looking to kind of help leverage the state's coastal program. I've been in this position for 3 years, and prior to that, I've served as Assistant Attorney General for the state for the 5 years prior, focusing on representing state agencies, particularly the natural resource and environmental state agencies in litigation and general counsel. Excited to be here.
Hi, my name is Mark Kulp. I'm a professor of geology at the University of New Orleans. Currently the department chair for the Earth and Environmental Sciences Department and director of the Pontchartrain Institute for Environmental Sciences at UNO. I've been at UNO slightly more than 23 years now, working on coastal type issues. And prior to coming to UNO, worked on coastal type things, specifically subsidence of the northern Gulf of Mexico for about 4 or 5 years. So I came down here originally thinking I'd be around for 3 years, and here it is 23 years later. So,
Fantastic, thank you. Well, thanks again to our panel members. Very, very pleased to have everybody here. So this diagram that you see up on the board is, I would say, for this audience and for this conference, is something that we see over and over again in terms of looking at what the 50-year land loss is projected to be for Louisiana, the statistic of Louisiana losing a football field worth of land every hour and a half. So this is kind of what we live and breathe in terms of this community and looking to the future about what can we possibly do about this and how is this not just a challenge for Louisiana and for the Gulf Coast, but in some ways how it could possibly be an opportunity for our communities moving forward in terms of developing these solution sets. Again, in terms of the context of this conference, I think compared to what may have been was referenced in 2010 compared to what we're seeing today, is more of this multidisciplinary approach, this sort of ecology, economy, ecosystem approach to all the different elements that come together for coastal community resilience and what we're calling the blue economy and blue technology. So how does economy and industry come together with government and policy, science and technology, cultural and history, particularly in terms of preservation of cultural and history, education and training, so workforce development, but also K through 12 education, and how are we preparing our next generations to sort of live and breathe these solution sets and for this to be sort of what they're leaning into in terms of the future. And then the environment and health, so public health, but also health of the environment as we move forward. And all of this thinking about the balance between adaptation and retreat. Those are really key words in the work of what we're doing at Deep Blue is adapting and retreating. And that's fundamentally what Louisiana, the Gulf Coast, and regions around the world are going to be facing in these low-lying coastal areas is what does adaptation look like, and where adaptation isn't going to be enough, what does retreat look like, and what are the real options, the real politique of what we're going to be facing in that respect. So this diagram, the eco-solution space or ecosystem approach to these sets of challenges is fundamentally the roadmap for what I laid out with our panel members, discussing about the different elements, the different sectors. And that's really what our different panel members represent, is these different sectors of research and academia, government, private sector, project work, policy, and legislation, all these different pieces that are part of an ecosystem, but then also a bit of a flywheel. So if you look at that bottom right area, those are sort of the projects that organizations like CPRA and the Water Institute, but also companies like Comite. So we have Jon representing Comite today, Also have folks like Rob Lane in the room who are working with Comite. And those are some of the firms that are designing some of these real solution sets that include wastewater assimilation plants, but other types of wetland restoration, et cetera, but the river diversions, all these different types of projects. As we move counterclockwise, we see the education piece, so K through 12, community education, university and PhD partnerships, degree programs and study sponsorships. So how do organizations like UNO and LSU and Tulane and the HBCUs and all these different organizations that can be contributing to the talent group, the workforce development of what these solution sets look like in the future. Moving up to the top there, we have the ideation component of this, so sort of the high-level think tank, some work that CPRA is doing, and certainly the governor's office and the state, federal level stuff that's going on, and certainly what Deep Blue is trying to help spur on. And then as we move over to the incubate and invest component, this is where we get into some of the work that important work that people like Jon Atkinson is doing. So extremely important that he's on the panel today and representing that portion of these new technologies. So what is the ecosystem? I spent about 20 years in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley in the incubation and acceleration space. So what is Louisiana? What is New Orleans? What is the Gulf Coast doing in terms of creating opportunities for financing, identification of these technologies, incubation and acceleration in terms of curriculum, but then also some of the funding, and then how does that, the investment in the seeding, coaching, and guiding and tracking of those companies as they start to develop the solution sets that then come back into that lower right and become real projects and real opportunities for what we're doing. So this, again, is some of the folks that we're going to be hearing from today. And why don't we start off with Harry coming up and talking a little bit about what's going on at the state level with some of his work.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate that. I've been asked to kind of set a little bit of the context and baseline kind of understanding for the discussion, really focusing on kind of the context down here in South Louisiana. What are the issues we're facing, the most pressing issues, and what are some of the things the state is doing to address them? So what here is at stake, and I apologize, looking around the room, I have a sense that some of this will be somewhat remedial, but if nothing else, I'm very excited to brag on CPRA and the master plan team and the new coastal master plan. So we finally have new maps that we can say are part of the coastal master plan, and so I'm excited to just show that off if nothing else. But really, we live down here in South Louisiana. We work down here. Many of us are from here and want to live and die here. Others are not and are frankly drawn to this place called South Louisiana because of the culture. And really, it's a bunch of different cultures, right, that make up the nearly 2 million people that live in South Louisiana. So there is a lot at stake. There's a lot to love. And what are those challenges that we're facing down here? This is the new maps. Instead of the red maps, we now have blue, which are actually, is an upgrade for those in particular who are colorblind, so they're able to fully see the coastal land loss. So that's a kind of just a side note for everybody's awareness. This is the land loss we've seen kind of to date. This is the land loss projections in a future without action. But this is the low projection. Projects, lower sea level rise, lower subsidence. And this is the higher projection in year 50. This is, what it looks like if we don't do anything. We also are facing, rising seas, subsiding coast. We're also seeing more severe hurricanes and storms. Don't need to remind folks of the 2020 hurricane season, which was a record in terms of number of hurricanes that made landfall, only to be followed in the year after with Hurricane Ida that tied Hurricane Laura and the most intense hurricane to hit Louisiana. But we are, as many of you are very well aware and are working, as part of this team, and that you heard, very eloquently put, during the lunch plenary with the governor and Chairman Klein, that we have this 2023 Coastal Master Plan, an updated master plan that is going to really guide our efforts over the next 6 years and really projects out for 50 years. And so this is, hopefully it's showing up well, but this is what the 50 years of projects looks like. You can see spread out well across the coast. It's a balance of restoration projects and risk reduction projects. And just to kind of put it a different way, we have over $19 billion of dredging projects over the next 50 years, 2.5 in programmatic, smaller scale barrier hydrologic restoration projects, barrier islands, $14 billion in the levees and other structural risk reduction projects. But I do also want to really call out this non-structural risk reduction component that I think is really exciting, to this conversation because, it really is kind of the next frontier in risk reduction. We're seeing more and more types of these projects. The Army Corps is endeavoring to do a non-structural risk reduction project for the first time in Southwest Louisiana with Southwest Coastal. That's a $3 billion project right there that mixes non-structural and marsh creation projects. And so, that is an area that I think, we have not seen this type of non-structural, which means, elevating structures and homes, flood proofing, and in some cases, voluntary acquisition. So I think that really kind of cuts to this conversation very well. And so I did also just want to show you kind of what the future with action looks like to really emphasize, I think, this is over 50 years, in year 50, what the coast looks like with action. So we still have a significant amount of coastal land loss. We have significant, land maintained, but the difference between the low scenario and the high scenario is significant. I mean, that is a huge component of what the future looks like. Is that do we have high sea level rise or not as high? Frankly, I wouldn't even endeavor to say low. And this is also just wanted to underscore the difference between the flood depths between the future with action and future without action. And so you can see a significant difference in reducing that flood risk. And so, what are the economic impacts that you see from the state's coastal program? Annual spending, this is actually old numbers. Sorry for that. I thought I updated that. But, as you heard Chip mention earlier, we are spending $1.6 billion this upcoming fiscal year in coastal protection and restoration. And we're projecting to spend that much, through the rest of this decade. And then, beyond that, it was also referenced this fiscal cliff that the state is facing. And so we're going to certainly need to figure out where to find additional revenues to backfill, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill dollars that we are, really relying on significantly over the next decade. And we'll still have other revenue sharing sources of funding for projects, but that is kind of the next frontier, and I think that through innovative project delivery, you can potentially kind of get supplemental projects to really supplement the state's coastal program. I did also want to just focus a moment on something our office and Charles Sutcliffe, our Chief Resilience Officer, has really been taking the lead on, and this is the Adaptive Governance Initiative that it really is looking to take the Coastal Master Plan and all the modeling and all the science that goes into it and make sure that it is not just informing CPRA, but it is informing all of government and really folks outside of government to inform their decision-making, to inform their investments in the coast and across the coast. And I think this is something that is very exciting. I think within state government, I think everybody expects state government to be well-informed and not siloed, and this is an effort to kind of break down those silos and make sure that if you're planning a school or you're planning a hospital, that you're cognizant of, well, what is that geography going to look like in 50 years, and making sure that we're investing, elevating structures if we need to, putting them behind structural flood risk reduction systems and the like. But then, another important thing that Governor Edwards wanted his administration to really focus in on is supplementing the state's coastal program with respect to reducing the state's greenhouse gas emissions. As I showed earlier with the difference between the high and low scenarios of what South Louisiana looks like in 50 years. I mean, sea level rise is going to be a major driver. The intensity of storms is going to be a major driver. If we can mitigate that, then we can really put ourselves in a better position to really to continue to live down here, which I think many of us want to do. And so Governor Edwards in 2020 put together a task force to figure out a path forward to try to come up with it's not the 2023 Coastal Master Plan, but maybe it's kind of analogous to the 2007 Master Plan, the state's first master plan. To really, we have to take a shot and put together a set of policies and program recommendations that can put Louisiana on a path to net zero by 2050. That's in line with the Paris Climate Accords and is aiming to avoid the worst of climate change. So we're already, as many of you recognize, we're already seeing the impacts of climate change, but to mitigate the sort of catastrophic climate change is what I think the realistic site is. And so these are the targets that the governor outlined in his executive order from 2020. And that really kicked off a planning process, a 15-month 49 public meeting planning process that included over 150 stakeholders who were officially at the table on the task force, advisory groups, committees, plus several rounds of public comment, and what and then informed by the best available science. When we endeavored on this, the latest greenhouse gas inventory for the state was in 2010, and we quickly recognized that we cannot rely on 2010 science to inform our decision makings a decade later. And so we commissioned an update to the inventory and determined that industrial emissions is far and away the biggest piece of the pie. Over 2/3 of our state's greenhouse gas footprint is coming from industrial emissions. That's primarily in petrochemical manufacturing and refining, in that sector. But and so you can see the main policy pillars of the Climate Action Plan, and it's renewable electricity generation. In 2018, we had only about 4% renewables deployed in this state. That is quickly going up, and is really we've seen the price of renewables go down significantly over the last decade, and so that is becoming increasingly cost effective. Even putting aside the climate need that we need to act on. Industrial electrification is one way to get at our industrial emissions. That's things like you can electrify a pump, a compressor, kind of those low temperature boilers. That won't get everything though, and that's where we're switching to kind of this low carbon and no carbon hydrogen and other fuel switching is another area where we can really decarbonize our industrial emissions. So these are, we did not just focus on those, renewables and hydrogen. We put together a big, tried to cover the economy wide and take a very comprehensive look. I will not get into that, but I did, just want to touch on a few of the kind of administration-led projects that we are focusing on. One includes coastal carbon, sequestering carbon through our restoration projects, and then ideally getting revenue from through crediting and reinvesting that into the state's coastal program, which can help hopefully mitigate against that fiscal cliff that we're seeing in about 8 years. Mapping industrial electrification, just to kind of really put it more clearly to industry of where you can actually see the most gains. Hydrogen Hub is an opportunity through the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. There's an $8 billion competitive pot of funding for that the state is competing for with Oklahoma and Arkansas to really create this hydrogen hub that can help decarbonize not only industry, but also transportation and other areas. And then carbon capture is something that has been a priority of this administration as well. So, the industrial carbon capture to complement the natural carbon sequestration as well. It might be, how am I doing on time? Good. Okay. And then wanted to just, kind of run through, some additional priorities. Addressing methane is a big one. That's an area where you can really, the jobs or the skill set is already there with much of our workforce in oil and gas. And so plugging orphan wells is an area where, $25 million to do that last year. And then we're looking to tighten regulations so that we have less orphan wells moving forward. We'll be doing additional climate planning to drill down on some more specifics of where we can act and kind of where we can really move the needle. And so we're really excited about putting together a priority climate action plan through an EPA grant before the end of this administration, before the end of the year. And then there's just an incredible, these are just a smattering of different programs through the infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. But there are billions of dollars that the state is aggressively competing for to really move the needle on reducing the state's emissions. And so these are the investments that are planned around the state. We have, I think, a nice geographical spread. We are not focusing on just the coast, even though it benefits the coast. I think there's a lot of opportunity across the board. And I think that does it for me. And hopefully that set the table for the rest of the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Harry. So we'll go to Jon next.
Okay, what I'm going to talk about some things that I think are constraints on where society in general is heading and here in the coast, and bring some things to the table that we need to think about as we move forward through this century. Well, you've heard about this, but sea level rise is accelerating, and I don't think that's going to slow down. The climate science is pretty dismal when you look at it. And we have, and here are some of the climate forces that I think are going to impact the coastal zone. One, if you look at the upper, just some of the climate forcing. So up in the upper here, since 1991 to 2020, the precipitation has increased in the upper Miss and the Ohio Basin, and that's where all the water comes from. And it's increased by 5 to 10%. So the climate is warming. There's more water in the atmosphere. It's raining more up there, and that's where the water comes from that comes down the river. And so we've seen about a 25% increase in the Mississippi River discharge since the 1930s, and about a 70% change in the Atchafalaya River discharge. There's a lot of variability there, but we're going to get a lot more water coming down the river, and I think sometime in this century, we're going to start exceeding regularly the project flood of the MR&T project. So we've got a lot of water to deal with, and we can use that for coastal restoration, or we can try to keep it in channel in the Mississippi River, which I think probably just won't happen. If you move on and down in the middle there, this is let's see here. Here we go. This was a near levee failure that happened down at Donaldsonville, and things like this I think will be more likely to occur in the future with an increasing river discharge. This is the Hurricane Harvey footprint centered over southeastern Louisiana. Now remember, Hurricane Harvey dumped 1.5 meters of rain in about 4 days. If that were to happen in southeastern Louisiana, it would result in catastrophic flooding all over southeastern Louisiana, and I think it would equal what we had in Baton Rouge in 2016, and 1.5 meters rain falling on New Orleans in 3 days. It would be catastrophic. And this is the kind of thing that's happening. Extreme precipitation events, extreme rainfall events are getting worse. They're become more frequent. And we can expect this is going to happen. We can't shut our eyes to it. And all the levees in the world are not going to save New Orleans from 1.5 meters of rain in 4 days. So we're going to have to think about that. And I think these are the kind of the big climate forcings that are going to be affecting this area. We know that the Bonnie Carey spillway, as a reflection of increasing river discharge, has been opened much more frequently in the last quarter of its operation. This is probably going to this will continue into the future, but it's episodic. It varies from year to year. We haven't had an opening for 3 or 4 years now, but before that it was opened regularly. This is going to continue. And of course, we've heard about hurricanes. We're right in the middle of the hurricane belt, and in the upper left there, the upper right there, you see this is all tropical storms. This is Category 3, 4, and 5 tropical storms that have happened, I guess, in the last several decades. I'm sorry that the dates are not there. Below that are these models that the Weather Service does, and these are the worst case scenarios for a Cat 3 and a Cat 5 hurricanes in terms of surge depth. So, and hurricanes, I say they are becoming larger, they're moving slower, they produce more rain, they're losing power more slowly over land, and they'll be more likely, a paper just came out that said they'll be more likely to hit the Atlantic and Gulf Coast because winds are coming onshore because of these large-scale teleconnection systems like the El Nino and the North Atlantic Oscillation and things like that. So these storms that used to pass out to sea are going to be more likely to hit land. So we're going to have to face up with this. And here is some of this is data. This is from a publication that we're revising right now, but there are the hurricanes here. There's the increase in Mississippi River discharge. This is the relative sea level at Grand Isle. It's eustatic sea level plus relative sea level. And this is from Shirley Laska at UNO, and from a book she published showing that these are the areas that you've had catastrophic flooding over the past several decades during the 21st century. So these kind of flooding events are becoming more frequent. And this sort of puts this into personal perspective here. That's I'm standing there next to my 2 granddaughters. My mother-in-law, who's now passed away, was sitting there. This was my wife, and my son is behind me. And if you can think about this, my mother-in-law was born in the early 1920s, and if my 2 granddaughters live roughly as long as their great-grandparents, my parents and my wife's parents, they will live up until the end of the century. And it's a period of about 175 years. And if you look at how that's going to play out, so here are 2 climate projections. One is the worst case scenario is this one. And this is sort of, if we do everything right, this is essentially impossible, I think. And so here's my life span right there. If I live as long as my parents did, this is my son, and those are my grandchildren, and those are my granddaughter just graduated from high school. So these are in the cohort of people who are going to college right now, and they're going to be living through this, and they're more likely going to see. It's more likely we're going to get this climate scenario than this one, which is almost impossible. So it's the kind of thing that people living today are going to experience during their lives. And so here's maybe some ideas. I'll start down here at the bottom left. This is an idea for a fortified fishing village, because during these hurricanes, we have enormous losses of fishery infrastructure, especially in boats and stuff. People who've been down there after they're spread out over the marsh. Build a series of these things along the coast so that they could be places where boats could be stored regularly, places for living, walls high enough that would withstand any storm surge, and with gates to be closed. And if you store your fishing industry in here, your infrastructure, a lot of it, you protect it. We don't have to rebuild it. And they could go back out. And these things would probably cost less than $100 million, just based on some things that CPRA are doing right now. And 10 of them would cost $1 billion, and the recreational and commercial fishing industry generates several billions of dollars a year in terms of total benefits. we've had a series of suggestions about what to do about New Orleans, and you can see New Orleans is below sea level, and you could fill parts of it in, raise structures, put a cypress swamp in front of it, and this is a suggestion that Jory Erdman at LSU and some architecture students suggested for New Orleans, that you raise the whole, just like was done at Lakeview, do that all along Jefferson Parish and New Orleans Parish, and then build a swamp in front of it, feed fresh water from the river and perhaps from treatment plants in New Orleans, and then within the city raise parts of it or raise the structures so that people are not below sea level. Because if a 1.5 meter storm dumps rain on New Orleans, people below sea level are going to flood. We can't pump out that much water. And this is sort of a side view. You see here is the raised land, and then behind it is land that recreation facilities like golf courses could be used to flood, but buildings or land itself is raised. And you could do this. You could create quite a raised land in New Orleans that could accommodate a lot of the people living there for about $10 billion, and that's an important consideration. Now, this is my last slide. This is a study that I've just finished working with Ehab Maselli and one of his students down at Tulane. This is when the 1927 crevasse happened. It put a 130 square kilometer crevasse out in Upper Bratton Sound, and we went out and sampled it and actually measured the thickness of the crevasse. And so a lot of sediment was deposited, and so I asked Ehab if he could model this to see if he could duplicate that crevasse. And so his result, basically, if you look at this figure right here, the black dots here are for the 2011 flood, which is one of the very large recent floods, up there with the 1927 flood. And so that's his total suspended sediment concentrations with discharge. These are concentrations from 1851 to 1929 at the Carrollton gauge, and some of these values get up to 1,000 milligrams per liter. So this is what used to come down the river, and this is what comes down the black dots, and these are data at Tarbert Landing. So what he found out is if he put the present river at the same discharge into Carnarvon, you couldn't build nearly as much land because the sediments aren't there. And I worked with a group of people who looked at the potential for getting sediments out of the lower Missouri dams. These are low dams, not the big ones up in the upper Missouri. And they want to manage those dams to bring sediment down the river because they're threatening endangered species, and we could get 100 to 200 million metric tons per year additional if CPRA would decide, well, I'm going to go spend $1 billion up in Missouri. It would be dollars much better spent at getting sediments down here so that diversions could do a much better job. And I think that's it. Yeah, okay.
So thank you very much, Jon. Really appreciate not only looking at what the stark realities are of what we're kind of facing in terms of climate change, but then also starting to look at what are some potential clues for solutions, resources that we can start to bring together to deal with these issues. So we'll bring Mark up next from the University of New Orleans.
So my discussion today isn't really topical like Jon's. Rather, what I wanted to do was just kind of throw out there and provide some information about what we're doing at the University of New Orleans in terms of the science associated with these types of issues that we're going to be discussing today and already have been discussed. And at the University of New Orleans, we have a couple different institutes. I see Marla in the crowd here. There's actually an institute called CHART. Marla, Center for Hazard and Assessment, Response, and Technology. Okay. So they focus primarily on sociological type issues that surround the current issues that we face, along the northern Gulf of Mexico. And what I wanted to focus on was the Pontchartrain Institute for Environmental Sciences, which really focuses kind of on the science and the technology of some of the issues that we're facing down here. And as I mentioned, I'm currently the director of the Pontchartrain Institute. This is my second go-around in about the last 15 years of being director, which probably means nobody else wants to do it, I guess, but no, it's actually quite fun. So the Pontchartrain Institute was founded back in 2001. When I first came to UNO, a late dear friend and colleague of mine, Shay Penland, had this idea of developing an institute at the University of New Orleans that really focuses on coastal restoration type issues. And so in 2001, the Board of Regents actually approved the institute. And since that time, with the Board of Regents, you have to go through a 5-year review period to make sure that you're generating science and revenue and all those sorts of things. I just, this past spring, submitted the next 5-year review and just recently got word that we are approved again for the next 5 years, so that's good news. The focus of the Institute then within the university is to be a vehicle for research, separate from academics. Now, that's not to say that students at the university are not involved in the research of the Pontchartrain Institute, but it's not a degree-granting program. It's strictly a research institute within the university for transferring funds, maintaining equipment, and also developing relationships. So what we do is we conduct research across a range of different topics. I'm going to show you a long, exhaustive list of a bunch of different faculty who are involved in it. And we also do a series of outreach programs to the local high schools, continuing education for teachers, and the community in general. So what we're really trying to do is foster all these relationships between the university and whether it be private stakeholder groups that are interested in coastal restoration type issues, mitigation efforts, state and federal agencies, pretty much across the board, as well as with different academic institutions. We've worked with LSU, Tulane, ULL, just to name a few. So what we're really hoping to do then is, develop a very rigorous, exhaustive research program that focuses on all these different things, the education, the planning, and trying to come up with what are some practical solutions. So, for example, one of the things that I work on or have worked on extensively is trying to find sediment resources for beach renourishment projects, for example, that are taking place around the state, and trying to come up with, the best practices that we can implement to find sediment that is suitable for those types of efforts. That's just to name one out of many different things that have taken place. So we focus not only on the northern Gulf of Mexico and not specifically on the Pontchartrain Basin, even though we're called the Pontchartrain Institute, but also any other system outside the regional area that has similar sorts of problems or similar types of ecosystems. We've worked up in New England, in Maine, we've worked in the Carolinas, we've worked in Florida, we've worked in Texas, all across the board. So a bunch of different areas, not just in the Pontchartrain Basin. And this is a lot of text here. I realized I kind of just clipped it out of some things that were available. So what we want to do is establish all those relationships, as I kind of mentioned, right? And then provide some of the answers that can go into the planning and the social sciences as well. So we hope to not only come up with, what I consider pure scientific information or theory and so forth, but then be able to provide that to the social sciences as well so that they can help make decisions in this regard as well. So what we do is we bring together a bunch of different expertise at the university. It's not just geology, it's not just earth science. We're trying to develop linkages between all of the different sciences so that we can really focus on what the mission of the university is, which is education, outreach, and service to the community. So again, I'm not going to read all this, but what I want to point out is we currently have about 9 people who are affiliated with the Institute, all the way from geotechnical, environmental engineering, biologists who do different sorts of work within these ecosystems, geologists such as myself. I consider myself a geologist primarily, and fishery biology. And then also recently we incorporated a couple chemists into the program who are looking at things like nutrient loading within the water column and various other chemical sort of processes. So what we think we have here is, at the moment, we continue to hope to expand, is a really diverse group of expertise that can come together and try to come up with some of these practical solutions. One of the things that we're really excited right now, is a recent funding that was supported by the Board of Regents. This is a proposal that was submitted by Dr. Robert Mann within our Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences. All those other people that I showed in the previous slide were listed as co-PIs, but we just got word a couple weeks ago that the Board of Regents supported this proposal. It's a 2-year proposal, slightly, I think it's around $600,000 or so, and what we proposed to do was really develop a network of instrumentation within the Pontchartrain Basin that currently does not exist, and be able to use that information then to make decisions and understand what's happening within the basin itself. I mean, it's right in our backyard, right? So we really should have an idea of what is happening within the basin. So the proposal then is largely for the acquisition of instrumentation, but also the deployment of that instrumentation, things that include wave and weather monitoring stations, which are relatively limited within the Pontchartrain Basin, sediment concentration stations to understand how sediment is moving within the basin, nutrient stations. And the whole goal then is that all these instruments will be linked together, and ultimately what we'll do is we'll have the entire network of data and information available to the public through online resources. So like I said, we just recently got information that it was funded, so this fall we'll actually start purchasing some of the instrumentation and think about where the deployments may take place. This is just a basic map showing I guess it's 10 stations, where we kind of had a preliminary vision of where the stations may be placed. If anybody has any sort of input as to where would be good places for these types of stations, please let me know. These are not solid in stone as to the locations, and so we'll be thinking about that. And we really want to develop the network so that it's not just for pure science, but it benefits everybody. Right? So the other thing that we do then to try to facilitate the mitigation efforts down here and overall understanding of what's taking place is we have a very strong educational research program run by Dinah Maygarden. She's within the Pontchartrain Institute. We call it SURF. Other people, it's actually dedicated to the late Shea Penland. Sometimes it's called the Shea Penland Research Facility. But it's this building down here in the lower right-hand corner figure. You can see the building in the sort of the mid-ground there. It's about a 4 to 5 story, I guess 4-story building that houses laboratory space. It's got kitchenettes. There are docks underneath it for stowing or slipping up boats, and it's located out in Chef Pass, so it's relatively accessible from the city by anybody who wants to take students out there or wants to use it as a location for workshops. We run a number of different workshops out there for both high school students as well as professionals. And again, a lot of text here, but the educational mission, we're just trying to make the general public aware of what the surrounding ecosystem is like. One of the things that I learned when I first came to UNO and started teaching at the university was that I found that there were a lot of students who really had not been beyond the confines of the levee system and were very used to just living within the city and hadn't actually explored the wetlands and areas around them. And I personally find that kind of frightening if you don't know what's outside the bounds of, this boundary that has been artificially constructed around you. And so what we're trying to do then is make sure that students are aware that they get outside the levee system, that they are aware of the ecosystems that surround them, and consequently also the problems that are associated with things like rising relative sea level, climate change, and so on. And so as part of these educational programs that are run out there, really cover a whole bunch of different topics, from the hydrology to the bugs and the bunnies that are located in the marsh or in the wetlands, overall estuaries, the life cycle of shrimp or crabs and things of that nature, so that people get a fuller understanding of that. This is just a series of slides showing some of the high school programs that have been out there, which is really focused on, experiential learning, getting the kids hands-on experience, getting the teachers hands-on experience too. We even find that, some of the high school teachers that come out there, they're teaching these kinds of sciences in the classroom, but really have never actually been into the wetlands or actually studied any of the marsh ecosystem themselves. So it's our hope to expand that knowledge base, and that collectively between the science that we do through the Pontchartrain Institute, as well as the educational component, that we can really kind of collectively bring those together and help create a situation where we can advance ourselves in the midst of all these problems that we we do face in the very near future. So just a couple different, these are just some of the local schools that we've worked with through the educational component. And then also organizations, things like the Master Naturalists. We've had programs out there working with them, Sea Grant, and even some tourist situations. So, and we hope to continue to grow that. So anyway, that's kind of a rundown of the Pontchartrain Institute and what we're doing in terms of things that we'll be discussing today.
Thank you very much, Mark. So as we're getting into this, again, what we're looking at is the different sectors or pieces of the puzzle that are the different elements in terms of the different parts of the ecosystem. So we started out with Harry talking about sort of higher level policy and what's going on with economic development and different pieces. And then we've heard about the science and what's happening with the coast. And now we're moving now towards what are sort of the implementation of some of these things. So next we're going to hear from Rebecca Conwell, who is the CEO and president at the Beach at UNO. And that's where we start to see some of this science and entrepreneurship and new technologies coming together with projects and companies that can, and giving those companies and efforts support so that we can start to implement these things. And then we'll finish up with Jon Atkinson talking about those cutting-edge technologies and entrepreneurs and how do we support them in this ecosystem so that they're bringing these solution sets to light.
So again, I'm president and CEO of the UNO Research and Technology Foundation. I want to give you a little bit of background so that you kind of understand our perspective and where we're coming from and where we're going now. The UNO Research and Technology Foundation was formed 30 years ago for the benefit of the University of New Orleans. And approximately 20 years after that, the research park was created. It was done in the style of most university research parks, but over the years, its relationship with the university kind of waxed and waned, and a lot of the focus was kind of redirected to real estate. So over the last 3 years, I came on board. We had a shiny new strategic plan to launch. Most people don't like to inherit a strategic plan. It made me want this job. And then over this time, we reorganized, kind of removed our focus so much on real estate and started focusing on innovation. We created an innovation division that's led by Shafin Khan, who's here. Super glad to follow Dr. Kulp and to hear the charts in the house, because everything that we do at the beach is for the benefit of the University of New Orleans. But on a broader scope, it's about building community. We're sitting on 30 acres. If you don't know, we're located at the end of Elysian Fields on the site of the Pontchartrain Beach Amusement Park. 600,000 square feet at the beach, and then we have 200,000 square feet at Avondale. I have approximately 40 tenants that include CPRA, the Water Institute, Wildlife and Fisheries. What's relevant here, I have the Navy, 200,000 square feet of Navy, I have General Dynamics IT. We have this amazing mix of tenants who are all focused on different areas, but one of the things in common is usually technology and their relationship with the University of New Orleans. So when we started moving and activating the innovation division, we were fortunate enough to have a supportive board that allowed me to create an innovation fund. And we put $100,000 in it each year. It's designed to kind of fill the gaps between what we do at the beach and our partnerships with the University of New Orleans. When you think about sometimes a great idea comes about between private industry and someone at a university, sometimes it's $10,000 standing in the way of implementing it. So it's really exciting to have some money to play with that we really 100% control And we get excited because it's influenced by our partnership with the university, but it's also really important to know that in addition to supporting our tenants, supporting the university, faculty, and staff's mission, but we're also supporting the economic development goals of our city and our state and our nation in collaboration with other entities like what John's going to be talking about at the Idea Village and GNO Inc. and NOLA BA. I want to stop and thank Greg for this panel because I think everyone that's in here really kind of highlights the important role of a knowledge economy. And the knowledge economy is perfectly situated for the kind of public-private partnerships that we have and facilitate at the beach. When you think about our ocean intersecting with our coastline, and then you put on top of it, I'm going to warn you, there's a pun coming. So flag here. When you take our beautiful ocean and the coast, and then you add an incredible amount of federal funding, mandates to reduce carbon emission, opportunities for incredible revenue from private industry. What am I missing? I'm sure there's a couple of other things that I'm missing. You're positioned for the perfect storm to be able to enjoy and see relevant transformational change in innovation and in partnerships. So I want to give you a couple of examples that we have. One of the things that when we started the innovation division, we weren't focused on offshore wind. We didn't know what direction we were going in. We just knew we had this beautiful university across the street and a lot of assets, and we wanted to help. And the big surprise was the perfect example and the perfect opportunity to engage a public-private partnership that aligns with the goals of our city, state, and our nation was offshore wind. And not only were we perfectly positioned, but we looked at all of the assets that the university had for oil and gas. They had a long history for the Naval Architecture and Marine Engineering School. We have electrical engineering and civil and environmental sciences, and all of those make up a wind program. So fortunate for us, we had a very supportive president who was ready to pivot really quickly because most of you know academia doesn't always move at the speed of light. And in a very short period of time, we set up the Louisiana Wind Energy Hub that is just became that space that we knew. It was basically from feedback from all the engineering companies that were in town. Every top offshore wind engineering company in the United States and the world has been showing up in New Orleans, of course, because of the upcoming opportunities with the lease. And so listening to them talk, we knew we needed a central hub at a place where people can come to think through what innovation needed to take place and what workforce needs we need, because you've got this renewable energy industry that's accelerating very quickly, needs workforce, and there's a lot of concern that there wouldn't be enough people to hold the jobs. So the perfect example is through the Louisiana Wind Energy Hub, we were able to start introducing some of the private industry partners with our faculty and staff. Gulf Wind Technology is a perfect example. They're working on new blades for offshore in the Gulf, which, by the way, are unique to the Gulf. This group probably knows that. It was a big revelation to me that you can't take a wind turbine off of Block Island and put it in the Gulf and it goes. We have slower wind, we have different soil, we have more corrosive environment, we have hurricanes that need to be addressed a little more frequently than they do in other areas. So it's a perfect opportunity for innovation. We have another startup that's been working on hydrogen, and I'm going to apologize, but because I want to get this right. We have a startup that's working with our team to develop a mobile floating hydrogen generation unit that harnesses the power of storm conditions over the oceans. Where would this person have gone had you not been able to raise a flag and talk about the Wind Energy Hub? We also, a perfect example of public-private partnerships would be the funding that we just recently received from Build Back Better grant, the Nexus. The New Energy Center of the United States is part of H to the Future that GNO Inc. led. Tremendous partnership over quite a few different states. The New Energy Center of the United States will be located at the beach, 15,000 square feet of office space that will be private, shared, and research space. Perfect collaboration opportunity between academic and private industry that will, of course, support all of the work and the innovation that what we're talking about today. There's tons of other things to talk about. I'm gonna wrap it up and let Jon go, and then I look forward to the general discussion. But I want to just push out there that when you have these kinds of industries all aligned, you only get yes. There was a time when business and science didn't like to talk to each other, and I'm sure there are people in this room that remember that. You know, you're not the boss of me. Well, you're not the boss of me, and so everybody was very content to work in their silos. But when you have federal grants that are constructed, that are encouraging participation, when you have the kind of revenue that's possible, people all of a sudden start to value and want to work together. And we can't underestimate the direction that we're going in. It's incredibly exciting. I don't want to say once in a lifetime, but these kind of opportunities don't come around this often. So start thinking about cross-industry collaboration. Start thinking about the multidisciplinary projects that were mentioned earlier between departments. You know, think about how can we take the vessels that are going between our ports all over the world that are frequenting the water. How can you use that vessel? The Water Institute has one project where they were putting the sensors on the bottom of the hulls. That's brilliant, you know. How can we capture other types of data? Or what about the farming up north? You know, how can we collaborate with our farms and give them more opportunity to better manage their farms? Better managed farms make more money, but it also reduces the amount of runoff that goes into our rivers that pollutes our oceans. And I mean, it should be as simple as a third grader being able to run a farm at this point, you know, that if you have the right technology in place. So I'm going to stop at that because, as you can see, I get pretty excited and I can keep on going. So thank you very much. I look forward to the next conversation.
So raise your hand. How many folks identify as not being from Louisiana, or you're visiting from somewhere else? Okay, so just a few people in the room, but good to see. So a lot of times we don't necessarily associate whether you're from Louisiana or from other parts, Louisiana being an innovation leader, technology leader. But that's really what Rebecca's starting to talk about, and certainly what Jon is leading in terms of the Idea Village. Something that I don't think we hear enough about is the idea that we've got NASA, Michoud, is currently building the rockets that are going to deliver the first woman to the moon. So there's lots of innovation going on here. All of the projects, all the solution sets we're talking about, those don't happen without talent and without development of new technologies. So with that, I'd like to ask Jon Atkinson to come up and talk a little bit about what's happening with Idea Village and the startup scene and technology development scene. And I'd also ask our panel members to start to move back to the table so that we can get right into our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Real pleasure to be here. Again, my name is Jon Atkinson. I'm the CEO of the Idea Village. You're seeing in real time today the difference between scientists and deep thinkers and business people, because you have all these wonderful presentations going on up here, and I have a Post-it note. So I want to share with you in true startup fashion two elevator pitches. One is an elevator pitch for the Idea Village, which is the organization that I run, a little bit of background on what we do and who we are in the innovation economy in New Orleans and increasingly across this region. And the other is an elevator pitch for why this matters. So a big part of the framing for this panel is how do we take this immense problem that we have around climate change, around the need to adapt, around the need to become more resilient, and make that into an opportunity. And that is fundamentally what entrepreneurs do, is they take problems and they turn those into opportunities. And so to give you a little bit of context, the Idea Village is a now getting close to 25-year-old organization that was started to identify, support, and retain talent in New Orleans and increasingly across the surrounding region. We over our lifetime, we've served close to 300 companies through our later stage accelerator programs. Those have gone on to today generate over $500 million in annual recurring revenue, and to generate over $500 million in outside investment in this region. They currently employ over 3,600 people and have generated over $1.7 billion in realized wealth just from startup activity that has come through our programs. Is over $2.5 billion that we're tracking across New Orleans as a whole since Hurricane Katrina. And so this is a real industry. It is increasingly becoming a real part of this economy, and we are proving that we can punch above our weight class in terms of innovation, in terms of startups, in terms of technology. And so how do we think about that in terms of the opportunity that is in front of us as it relates to climate tech? All of the things that you've seen today are not just Louisiana problems, they are global problems. And so the frame that I would bring to this conversation is we need to increasingly think about how do we take these local problems and the local energy behind problem solving, the local innovation, and think about how we export that to national and global markets. There is a huge opportunity for business creation here. And if we do not capture that opportunity, it will be a massive miss for Louisiana. I can personally see a world 10 years from now where we talk about our two industries being oil and gas and tourism, or industrials and tourism. The third leg of that stool, and maybe the bigger leg of that stool 10 years from now, could be this work in climate tech. And so we need to, as a community, come together around that opportunity and start to build the structures and resources and support systems that make this not just a way to solve our own problems, but to export those solutions. In our work, we talk a lot about density as destiny. So our job is really to bring together startup founders, to bring together mentors, to bring together investors, to bring together sort of all of the resources that go into creating a successful company. We need to start thinking about how do we build that density around climate-oriented founders? How do we get them access to the types of problems that are sort of the real heart of the industry and heart of the opportunity? If I'm a founder and I can start with a problem that a big company has already validated for me, or a big research agency or CPRA or any one of the other folks that we've talked about today, I'm starting 15 steps out of the gate. Because I'm not now building a solution in search of a problem. I'm starting with a customer problem and building a solution that I know they're going to pay for. So how do we open those doors? How do we connect our innovation ecosystem to these resources and to our legacy industries around this type of innovation? And how do we really plant a flag for this is an identity within innovation that we want to express as a community? So our programs historically have been industry agnostic. We work with startups across a wide range of industries. But I think for this region to really be recognized at the level of activity that it is, that it has really seen to date, we're going to have to start to specialize, and we're going to have to start to develop some industry identity around real problems of the future. And so for me, climate is central to that. The other lens that I would add here is we talk a lot about, and I love Greg's framing around adaptation and retreat. I think that is part of the equation, and that's part of what we need to be talking about here. But what I've seen in my career here since Hurricane Katrina is a real focus on the resilience industry and the sort of ecological science. But we also have a tremendous opportunity to build solutions for climate change, to get to the root of the problem. Louisiana is a major industrial polluter. Harry had those slides in his deck showing the specifics around that. But I heard, I haven't verified this, but anecdotally I was working with some folks out of the UK. who were basically saying that the carbon footprint of the state of Louisiana is roughly equal to that of the UK as a whole, and that we're roughly a fourth of the emissions in the United States as a whole. And so if those numbers are even close to true, if you are building solutions to climate change, particularly on the supply side, you are going to have to come through New Orleans. So how do we capture that energy and make sure that that flows to our own companies, to our own entrepreneurs, to our own innovators, and make sure that those solutions are being built here in this region so that this becomes an engine for economic development, not just a way to solve our own existential threats around climate change. So looking forward to the discussion. Thank you all for the opportunity to be part of it.
Thank you very much, John. So we've got about 20 minutes for discussion in case anybody has to start to sneak out for other stuff. If you are interested in this topic and want to hear more about it, I do want to make sure, grab one of these. This is the Blue Economy Primer, which is a podcast that Deep Blue puts out that is essentially looking at this blue economy and blue technology development piece and how these things come together in this sort of an ecosystem approach or eco-solution space. So with that, to get things started on some of our questions, and please have your questions ready because we want to get to you as soon as possible. I want to start out, open this to everybody, but maybe a little bit direct it at Harry, thinking a little bit about some of the numbers that you threw up in terms of the expenditures and the size of the projects, how this may relate to state GDP, and the transition away from this high-intensity fossil fuel extraction economy, and how we, with these sorts of opportunities, how can we be transitioning towards a sustainable, a regenerative blue economy in the coming 50 to 100 years?
Yeah, great question. Certainly oil and gas, heavy industry is still a big part of our economy, but the energy transition is happening and it's real, and we are seeing it both with the Fortune 500 companies that are making their climate pledges and trying to figure out how to do it, and I think we can really be that leader where we help inform those decisions. I mean, I think a lot of entities, including the state, quite frankly, made a pledge, recognized based on science, and it's kind of working backwards. And it's like, okay, here's what we need to do to avoid the worst. Well, how do we get there? And that's where we are putting together. We put together the roadmap with the climate action plan, and I think other kind of the private sector is doing just the same. And I think it kind of starts with leveraging the workforce that we already have. We've already talked about how offshore wind kind of draws on the existing workforce and know-how and kind of infrastructure that we have from oil and gas. And so if you can weld an oil rig or engineer and design an oil rig, you can do the same for the supports for a wind turbine. If you can service an offshore oil rig, then you can service presumably an offshore turbine. And so I think there's those kind of directly or very easily transferable skills. And then there's the innovation factor where, how do we switch off of, I think, like it or not, we rely worldwide on chemicals. How do we reduce the pollution from that manufacturing of chemical process? And is it hydrogen? Is it another kind of lower emission process? And I think that's where some of the investments that some of these larger petrochemical companies are investing to try to get there, because it is seen as one of the harder to abate or hardest to abate sectors of the economy. You can buy an electric car today, and it's almost cost comparative to a kind of internal combustion engine. So that's kind of the transportation sector. You can electrify your home. And you rely more and more on renewables and battery storage for the energy, the power production side of things. But then heavy industry, I think everybody's kind of pushed it globally to to the back burner a little bit of like, let's figure everything else out, and then we'll get to kind of the heavy industry side. And if we can kind of lean in there and figure out how to produce those products in a low or no carbon way, I think that is kind of bodes well for our GDP and our economy very well.
So, John, I know you've got some stark reality views of kind of what the future may hold, but also you brought up some opportunities as well.
Well, one of the things I'd like to say is one of the reasons we produce so much greenhouse gases in Louisiana is because the people who use our products don't produce them. And they solve their problem by putting that in Louisiana. And a lot of it's moved to the third world. You don't solve the problem. The reason we're not like Vermont or Oregon is because we're making all the stuff that's polluting that they're using. So they ought to help us pay for that.
Anybody else want to comment on opportunities, economic development opportunities for the future here?
I'll just expand on one thought here, which is I think one of the real opportunities that is coming down the pipe is that these conversations are starting to be less of a business to government relationship and more of a business to business relationship. And the more that we can accelerate that transition where there are a diversity of different customers for people who are bringing climate innovations and trying to implement those climate innovations, the faster this is going to go. And so I feel bringing the chemical sector in, bringing the oil and gas sector in, we've done some work with Shell around their innovation apparatus, which is called Game Changers. They don't talk about themselves as an oil and gas company anymore. They talk about themselves as an energy company. The oil majors, the traditional oil and majors, have embraced a climate change future, and they are trying to figure out how to transition. And so and some of them may be farther along on that curve than others, but the more that we can embrace that and we can truly build this as a dynamic industry cluster that is less and less dependent on how many dollars is CPRA spending this year, the faster we're going to turn this into a sustainable engine.
Great. Thanks, John.
I also want to jump in, and you touched on the K through 12 education and the different environment that exists now than it did, say, 20 or 30 years ago. Our children and our grandchildren that are in school right now have parents that are more focused on this issue. They're learning about this issue in school. We have this renewed focus on STEM. They are going to be solving problems way before they get to college that will be implementable. I love the timeline that showed, at what point the young people are going to be where they're going to be 50 years from now, 40 years, 30 years from now. It's going to be very, very exciting to see a generation of solution-oriented population that we don't have the depth of at this time.
So I have a number of questions here, but we're getting down to about almost 10 minutes. I want to make sure there's time for you to ask questions. If somebody want to break the ice here in terms of a first question? There we go.
I know y'all see my head bobbing and bobbing because I am the community aspect of all you, with everything you're talking about. And I didn't hear it really come out from you all. But my question is, I understand building relationships, business to business, business to government, not so much business with community. In the black community, the environment and climate change was never talked about. For over 50 years, we've been dealing with it. And so what I would like to see throughout the city of New Orleans is more outreach, direct outreach in those communities that need the communications, that need the information, that need the training, that need the language to understand what we're actually going through. Because climate change is a health issue that's affecting all of us, especially those of us that live in the urban environment. And what I would like to see, well, what I know is needed, not what I would like to see, because I live in Treme. And what I would like for you all to do is provide more direct interaction, contact, and funding so that we can communicate more openly and on a regular basis on how we can help change the effects of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. I'll just underline that in some of my past work, we talk about the three-legged stool of sustainability. So something can be environmentally sustainable, but if it's not economically sustainable, meaning how do we pay for it, and if it's not culturally sustainable, then what's the point? Because then we're losing, what are we fighting for? So that cultural preservation, particularly, frankly, in our lower parishes outside the levee system, where we have unique French Cajun language, music, food, etc., but obviously also here in our urban areas, there are cultural heritage gems that we need to be protecting, and that has to be a fundamental part of any strategy that we're doing in terms of the type of communication and outreach that Cheryl's talking about. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Yes, I would just kind of echo that and kind of emphasize just that if I didn't cover it in my presentation, but the impacts of climate change are felt most acutely in Black and brown communities, in economically disadvantaged communities. So they are, if South Louisiana is generally on the front line, I mean, it is those communities that are actually on the real front line and have the most to gain from switching to renewables. That improves air quality. So if you live by a highway or a road, a heavily trafficked road, the switching from diesel and internal combustion, your traditional cars, to renewables or to electric vehicles has a direct benefit and is benefited most acutely by Black and brown communities. And so, and I think there's a tremendous opportunity. I wholly agree. More outreach and more engagement is part of the solution if we're going to get it right. And I think there's. Not that money is the answer to everything, but there is some really exciting opportunities. And actually, the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice just won a very large grant to help facilitate and help to pull together the community, various communities, as well as pulling in and connecting to government programs, to opportunities to put projects that they want to see in their communities, like community solar. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity to have community solar, across the state, including disadvantaged communities that can then help improve not only their air quality, but also improve resilience. So, after a storm like Hurricane Ida, you have backup power potentially to kind of have a microgrid. So you have essential services to, access to fans or air conditioning, to help, avoid having to, turn on gas-powered generators that killed, more people than I think any of us actually expected because of carbon monoxide poisoning after Hurricane Ida. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity through this federal funding. Frankly, I think I'm getting paid to be, up on everything, and the amount of information that is coming out of the federal government in particular, trying to spend money and get projects out, to communities is so fast that we need to, be more coordinated and bring more people to the table to make sure that money is coming to Louisiana and actually getting turned into projects that communities want.
Yeah, another great project in that respect is the Community Lighthouse Project that Together New Orleans, Together Louisiana, Together Baton Rouge is doing to have a community building with solar available after storms that's within a 15-minute walking distance of anybody who needs it. So those sorts of things are examples, but certainly we need more. Any other comments there?
I'd just echo, I think from the perspective of our work, a big part of what we try to do is build an open innovation ecosystem that folks can come into. I love that you shouted out the language. I think that's a big starting point for a lot of folks. Is how do we teach people the language to start to develop their own solutions for their own communities, and that is a big part of the thinking. And I think the more that we can do that, the faster the flywheel is going to spin.
Okay. Another question?
I'm Amy Kennedy. I also live in New Orleans. And my question is just about the LNG. How does all of this fit in? Are any of your projections kind of taken in with what's happening currently with LNG facilities, the liquid natural gas facilities that are coming in, that are currently being built, Plaquemines Parish, Cameron Parish? Is there any, this might not be, we have 5 minutes, but is there anything that you guys have thought about or contextualizing your work within that environment that's already here?
So you mean in terms of community and environmental impacts from LNG as a transition?
Just is your work kind of a push, like when we're looking at this exciting work, this innovative work, how does it fit in with what's being legislated, with what is happening with LNG, with 12 projected facilities going in between here and Baton Rouge? So I hesitated to ask it because I don't want to end on that note, but I am curious, is your work is it just parallel to that work and that's what your projections are based on, or is it these projections separate from that? I think, does that make sense? But it's just a big question for 5 minutes, 4 minutes.
A quick stab at least, on the projection side, we did incorporate the permitted but not yet built facilities in our greenhouse gas inventory and projecting out kind of how to get to net zero. So at least, at least that is contemplated, that all of those projects may not get built. They're permitted, but, so that was a kind of, at least we're putting it all out there and recognize that it is on the landscape. I think the sort of economics will, I think, largely play a role in where, whether all of those projects get built, how long they will operate for. I think there's still a tremendous amount of coal being coal-fired power plants that are around the world, and so if it is, I think we were nearing the end of that long bridge, as a transition fuel. But I think, the ramping up of renewable production in particular and battery storage is what I think, to me, the answer is to actually get to the end of the bridge. You can't take away an energy source until you already have something to fill its place. And so I think, otherwise energy prices are going up, people are left in the cold. That's a way, I think a surefire way to kind of have, backsliding even further. And so if we can kind of add in the renewables, add in, that job creation from that effort, you then kind of, one, reduce price that then kind of reduces reliance on LNG because it is expensive to liquefy it, to move it all, halfway around the world. So, I don't know, that's just my 2 cents. But
I think you probably opened up a can of worms, which touches on some of what Jon talked about in terms of, are we going to meet the goals that are being set? And the quick answer is no, unless we really, really fundamentally change our global behavior. So that goes back to the adaptation piece of assuming we don't meet some of these goals, what does adaptation and retreat look like in Louisiana, and what are we doing to maximize cultural preservation and environmental preservation? So we're going to run out of time here real quick. Panel members, is there any final comments that you all would like to make before we wrap up? All right, then let's say, is there one more question we can squeeze in?
I'm Micah Weltmer from the Water Institute. My question is for Jon. And so in your talk, you talked a lot about questions of how we take the innovation to the next level and give it to, export it, things like that. So my question for you is, in your work at the Idea Village, what are some of those answers what are some of those handoffs that you do provide to your folks to give them maker spaces or to give them, increased access to resources to allow them to scale the way it's going to be needed to export it like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So I'll also touch on one of the other points that was made in the question here, which is I think that one of the things that we need to do in Louisiana is reframe our thinking about economic development from sticks and bricks to people. And when we reframe around people, we can start to design those systems that are going to become much more sustainable over time. And so, what we do fundamentally, we don't own space. We don't, we don't necessarily give folks direct resources. We build a community around founders that can help them do something that is very difficult in starting an innovative company, improving that model, in getting that product to market, that they have the right people around them, they're speaking the right language, and they are set up for success and pointed towards these sort of national and global markets. And so, that covers the gambit of all of the things that you would think about in terms of starting a business. We start with the input to our system as someone who is an expert in their field, who has seen a problem that they want to solve. And so, what we do is sort of look at the problems that are common across companies and try to create systems around those to help share in those resources across companies. Rebecca wants to comment on that as well as part of what you do.
Well, yeah, I love having the Water Institute at the beach, and this is a discussion that you have frequently when you have fixed real estate. You want to be able to support growing businesses. You want to welcome new ones and allow an environment that's flexible, so that because a new startup doesn't know how quickly they're going to grow. They're very uncomfortable with committing to space. So we're making decisions right now that will be able to support the entire ecosystem, from startup to more mature organizations that are growing and need to expand their footprint, and we don't want to lose them. At the same time, we love the collaborations between our tenants, that community that we're building, and the University of New Orleans and other academic institutions. I think that there's a tremendous amount of collaboration going between our universities also as well.
All right, so we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you all very much for being here. Really appreciate it. Thank you to John, Rebecca, John, Harry, and Mark. Really, really appreciate your time and all the work that you're doing. I'll put up the contact information here if you want to follow up with any questions. And again, if you want more information, the podcast or our information, you can ask questions and follow up. Please do. Will you please have a hand for our panel? Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us on the Blue Economy Primer. If you enjoyed today's podcast, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Please help us spread the word, and be sure to visit our website at www.deepblue.academy, where you can find all of our available episodes, access important links and supporting information for each episode, send us your comments and/or suggestions for potential guests and topics, get more information about our community engagement initiatives, and join our mailing list, as well as make a much appreciated tax-deductible donation to support our nonprofit education and research mission. Thanks again to the Dan Lucas Memorial Foundation and the Pontchartrain Conservancy for their critical financial and institutional support. Until next time, when we meet again on the ever-expanding horizon of the Blue Economy.